This is the Henry's Child Podcast. Am I crazy? Or am I just raving?
Howard, hey man, thanks for coming up.
Yeah, I'm psyched to do this.
Yeah, being on the podcast.
Yeah.
Talk a little music.
I'm psyched that you have the podcast. When John told me about it, I was like totally psyched about it.
Yeah, I had him out of order. I had Carrie Rich on.
Right.
And John Bull. It's great.
It was interesting hearing John talk about it because it's like this history that we share in many ways. Like, I didn't meet John until later on, but the history that we share, and it's interesting to hear someone talk about it as history when it's your life. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, we had joined your family. So by the time that Henry's Child got signed to Elemental,
right.
And of course, due to the Professional Talent Network, I was kind of already hanging out at Elemental.
Totally.
Right? Like,
yeah. Well, you were
making
the one
copies and doing, fixing computers and shit like that.
Well, you're the one person in Henry's. Well, you guys showed up pretty frequently, but you would hang out more and.
Yeah.
And I would be
in fact, Steve Woodward was like, dude, this isn't a playground.
Sounds like Steve to me. But the thing was, like, I would be working, and then I'd walk in to ask John something. It's like, hey, Tommy, what are you doing here? You're here. Oh, well, hi. Because I would be in my little room across from John's.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right, yeah.
Because we had that window that separated us. I don't know I forgot what that office was before. I mean, it was I don't know. But John's office, and I just this little window that John and I had between us, so we could kind of like, we set up our desks so we could like talk to each other.
Yeah.
Through the little window. It was like an 8x10 window. It was funny.
It's almost like when John was like, "Oh, you mean you can get pictures off the internet? Oh, check this out."
Yeah.
How do I save this, Tommy?
Yeah.
I think that it's really great that you still know Scott and Nance.
Well, it's interesting. It's probably the same with you. I mean, I can tell. I mean, you still have kept in touch with tons of people, and I think for me, it's like those people are my family, especially that era of my life. I mean, those are the people we were in the trenches together. I see it. I kind of see it like that.
I'm with you, man. That's when we were all actively touring and out there making records and doing the whole thing. And
Did this one tour in, what was it, 96, I forget now, with Let's Go Bowling and Real Big Fish. And it was a big tour at the time. And I'm really good friends with the guys from Let's Go Bowling to this day. I was like the best man on one of the weddings. And
wow, really?
Yeah, so,
nice.
Scott and I text all the time. And if I'm not up here, I don't know, I come up here as much as I used to because I'm not doing music business stuff. But John and I keep in touch all the time too. So yeah, it's pretty much a little family.
How did you get into managing bands? And of all bands, the Cherry Poppin Daddies.
Oh God. Well, I came to Oregon in '87 to go to graduate school from New York. I was living in upstate New York at the time.
Okay.
Where I went to school and just at SUNY Albany, and I'd come through Oregon. I'd come through Oregon in '85, the summer of '85, from two friends of mine from high school. We did this trip. We zigzagged across the country in a van. We put 12,000 miles on a van. And our motto was no freeways.
Whoa.
And only one night a week at a hotel. And we camped most of the time. And it was this awesome trip.
That's a young man's game right
there. It is. There's a 22-year-old man's game, 21-year-old man's game, actually. And when we came through Oregon, I was like, holy shit, this is the most incredible place. The Northwest just blew my mind. It was so beautiful.
Nice.
And so it kind of reminded me of upstate New York, but it was bigger mountains, bigger trees. I'm going back a little bit. But anyway, so when I came to Oregon, U of O, I met all these people who were musicians, like Dan Schmidt and Steve Perry. But I was a writer, and at that time, it's not the same as it was. There was an overlap between the music community and the writing community.
Oh, sure.
All the artists knew each other.
Yep.
And once the university privatized, it kind of shut them off. Like, you can talk to people at the university and they'll say that they're part of the community in Eugene, but you never see those people. We would hang out together all the time too. So I went to graduate school, got my MFA, was writing my first novel, and then I tried to publish it, and I was traveling around waiting to see whether I could get it published. And at the time, I was going more and more broke, sleeping in people's garages and...
True artist.
Yeah.
True artist. Yep.
And paying $45 to sleep in people's garages and things like that. And then I came back from Europe. I had a little bit of money left, and a friend of mine, edited a book called If They Move, Kill 'Em. It was a biography of Sam Peckinpah that Atlantic Grove put out. I ended up going to Europe. I'd never been there before. Came back 6 weeks later, stayed in Minneapolis at a friend's place, but it was way too cold, and came back to Oregon. I was totally broke. That's when I was sleeping in garages. I was friends with this writing book friend of mine who I'd actually I put out a magazine called Emergency Horse for 2 years. It was we called it a cross between Atlantic Monthly and Mad Magazine.
Nice.
But we had some really great like people in Europe sending us like articles about the Latvian Revolution. It was a really great magazine. We had an article about they make a movie about Callahan now. We had an article about Callahan, and we got in trouble because we called it Tales from the Crypt. And everyone was like, that's tasteless. And Callahan thought it was hilarious. He was just like, that's hilarious. Don't change that. And anyway, so one of the guys I worked on this magazine with, and we had distribution all throughout the Northwest. We'd like drive to the independent bookstores and give them the magazines, and not many of those.
And so was it like a zine, or was it like an actual magazine that was printed?
Yeah, it was printed.
Yeah,
that
was a big deal,
in
man.
Salem. Yeah.
I remember that.
And we put it out. We had boxes in Eugene, and so when we got some pretty good press from other people about it, and it just was, we weren't making money, but we broke even, and that was the amazing thing.
Breaking even is half the battle right there.
Exactly. We broke even. We had ads, and we had a lot. Like this guy Scott Taylor, it was really great at getting ads, and he's a graphic designer in Seattle now. I think he's in Europe with his family now. But we all were like overworked and underpaid. We weren't making any money, and I just decided I wanted to finish my novel. Then I finished my novel, and I went to Europe, and I came back. I did a couple that covered this film festival, and this Peckinpah Film Festival in France, and I came back, and I was totally broke. And then one of the guys from Emergency Horse was a publicist for the Daddies.
Ah, okay.
And then he went to Steve and Dan. They went, "Oh yeah, Howard. You ran him. Yeah, we know Howard. We need a business manager," because Brooks Brown was their saxophone player at the time, and he was leaving the band, and he was their business manager. And so I said, and they were like, "We'll pay you this much." And I was like, "Oh man, I could actually pay rent and
dude, money."
Because the Daddies were making money at that point. I mean, they were making pretty good cash at that point. This is like '94 in the North. They'd go up to Phoenix Underground in Seattle and make like $3,000 for 45-minute sets. And they were doing, or 2,500 maybe that was that time. But they play La Luna and almost sell it out, and they'd sell out the Wow Hall, so they were making pretty good money on the week. We'd play every Friday and Saturday. So I was a business manager, and then they were managed by Bill Graham Presents at the time.
So when you became their business manager, what year was that?
94, June of 94.
94, okay, because I remember Zoot Suit Riot came out in 97. And that was because they just did the 20-year anniversary. Right. And I cheated, of course. I went,
that's good.
Trying to get some info for the interview today.
Research.
Yep, sure. And that's great. So 94. Okay, well.
And that was Ferociously Stoned had been out for like 5 years at that point.
Yeah. And that's what I remember. That Teenage Brain Surgeon, like all the kind of like what I think of the Daddies, I think of them as Ferociously Stoned.
Cherry Poppin Daddies Strut.
Right.
Drunk Daddy.
Yep.
And so what happened was they hadn't put out a second album. They were looking for a record label. They had recorded all this stuff. They had their own quote unquote studio in this warehouse behind the old, remember that church that was behind the Taylor Street offices?
Yeah, it was a deliverance church.
There was this building, this weird building. It was like an old warehouse building between the church and the Taylor Street thing. It was weird that it was in that same neighborhood.
Yeah.
What happened was the people who owned it threw us out eventually, and It's a long story. They didn't throw us out because we were a band, but they threw us out because they had someone else who could pay higher rent than we could. They had a studio in there, and they recorded all this stuff, and we're trying to get it in there. Bill Graham Presents we're managing them on the predicate that they'd shop the album and see if they could get a label to pick it up. And they couldn't get any labels to pick it up. They got like Hollywood Records nibbled at it or something, but they couldn't get anyone to pick it up because it was too diverse. There was too much. You remember those albums? They were just like swing, punk rock, ska,
the next one,
metal. Right. It was all over. Those albums were
yeah.
Like Steve's whole thing was telling a story. It wasn't about people. It wasn't about one particular kind of music, right?
Yeah.
And at that point, we're going to do our first national tour, and no one in the band wanted to deal with the booking. So we had the Tahoe agency, which ended up being a pretty big agency at one point because they had us and Sublime and Blink-182 and all the ska bands. Basically, they had like
those were all pretty big at the time. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're all gold, platinum bands.
Yeah. Wow.
Leaping ahead. But at one point, I remember when the Daddies were like on the radio everywhere. Sublime and Blink-182 were on radio everywhere. I remember the guy from the Tahoe agency calling me. I was just in my car. And I was listening to in L.A. and I was like, there was the Daddies playing, and then Blink-182, and then Sublime, and I was like, wow. And I was like, yeah, man, it's weird. It's a weird world we live in.
It's yours, baby. That's yours. That's great.
And I didn't know how to book at all. I didn't know what was going on, but they basically taught me how to book.
The Tahoe agency did.
Yeah, they're like,
okay.
I was like, well, they're like, well, you don't want to drive this more than this much a day. You want to do this. You get to get it off and drive. I kind of learned how to book through them kind of telling me, you don't want to do that. I was like, okay, why? Okay, well, I won't do that then.
It's like learning in reverse. Like they're telling you what not to do, which is great.
Yeah.
I train people on computers that way too.
Yeah, totally. It was a great experience. And then we did this national tour to CMJ in New York. And
CMJ,
and
wow.
I was in 94. I was there for our Daddy's first national tour was fall of 94. And I at that point, I had started going on the road with them, because I wanted to see how the road worked, because they'd come and give me money and receipts, and I'd be like, what the hell does this mean? It was like, Steve was like, well, Dan, like, come out on the road with us. So I'd go to like River City Saloon and the La Luna show in Seattle, and I'd see how it worked, and I pretty much learned how to become a road manager.
Wow, nice.
So we went out, we did this national tour. We had a van and a pickup truck with a cab on top, and we went to New York. I mean, we did a national tour. We did, drove across, played across. The thing with the Daddies was we could make enough money. We could play a gig in Portland and Seattle, and then have a bank. And then at that point, they were doing really well in Boulder too. So we'd have we'd have this bank of like $5,000 to $8,000. Like, okay, we're going to leap into the country now, where we're going to make $150 a gig. And we actually, in Seattle, Chicago was actually a pretty good market for us. No one knew who we were east of Boulder,
Yeah.
Well, they knew who we were maybe at that point. They didn't really know who the Daddies were. Anyway, so we did this tour. Without going into the detail of it, things didn't work out with Bill Graham Presents, and they dropped the Daddies, right?
So how did they get Bill Graham Presents in the first place? Do you know that story?
Because they played a gig in San Francisco. I forgot the name of the club. It's not registering in my brain right now. It was a club that doesn't exist anymore. It was actually in the Haight, right where Amoeba is right now. And it was a bar right there. I only went there once to San Francisco with them before that club closed. Which was funny. We went to San Francisco. We got there early, and we were sitting at this bar before, and the guy was like, "You guys are in a band, huh?" And we're like, "Oh, I'm not. They're the band." And I'm like, "Well, what band is it?" And the Cherry Poppin Daddies. He's like, I don't really like that band much, but you guys bring out the Betties, so I like that.
Bring out the Betties. That's awesome.
And I was like, "Yeah, man, that's part of the gig, right?"
That's what it is. You're certainly not doing it for the money, baby. That's for sure.
But anyway, so then we went. So what happened was, they played a gig at this club. And this is a funny story. They played a gig at this club, and all their instruments had been stolen. Like
what?
The night before, they got in San Francisco, and not all of them, but a lot of their keyboard was stolen. All this stuff was stolen. But they knew musicians in San Francisco, so they borrowed all this equipment, went to play the gig, and I think Chris Azor was playing a melodica.
Yeah.
Not keyboards. He was playing a melodica instead.
Yeah.
this guy, I forgot his name, Eric Levy, I think his name was. He was a old school like road manager. Oh no, he was a sound guy, and he had been the sound guy for like some pretty prominent bands. I can't remember what bands they were. And he ended up, I might be getting that wrong. He his claim to fame, he was quite the coxman.
Quite the coxman. Did he help bring the Betties out too?
I don't know. I mean, he definitely hit on whenever we played a gig in San Francisco, he hit on every woman who was there. But and you know, you swing enough, you're gonna hit the ball, right?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, it's a good philosophy.
But anyway,
I'll find the money.
He worked as a scout and kind of worked for Bill Graham Presents, and he showed up and he went back to Bill Graham and went, these guys are one of the most amazing bands I've ever seen. You got to sign them. And so then they ended up signing them and said, oh, right, we'll try to get a record deal. You guys work on a new stuff? Okay, cool. Let's try and see if we can shop this. And it just didn't work. So then we went to South by Southwest, and basically the story was we got to South by Southwest. We're supposed to play this gig, and they're supposed to get all these record label people out, and basically no one showed up, and they were hardly there for the gig. It was like we were really annoyed because we drove all the way out to New York City.
CMJ is funny. I remember like going to Barnes & Noble, and they were the ones that had the new CD.
Exactly. All the new bands coming out.
College
radio.
Alternative, yeah.
College
crazy.
Music Journal.
Yep.
They're still
crazy.
around, I think. I've since I left the business, I don't really know much about them. But so then they dropped them, and then we're like, okay, what are we going to do? The album's basically done. We're going to put it out. And I was like, let's just put it out ourselves. Let's create a record label.
So this was the album before Kids on the Street? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
We had to deal with somebody, it's a side story. We had to deal with somebody who had been putting the albums out and bankrolling the whole thing. And I was like, we need to get real distribution. We need to figure this out. I knew nothing about this stuff. This was just learn. It was basically my whole experience, the way I experienced it was a paid internship. I learned the whole business just like by osmosis, and like when John was talking about, John Bolt was talking about it, he was the same type of thing, right?
That's awesome.
I was like, they showed me a CD, I know what a CD looked like, and I was like, this is just like publishing. I know how to publish stuff. Because in college, when I was at the U of O, I was editor of Timberline, which was a literary magazine at the time, and then I did Emergency Horse, so I knew how to publish. It was, and I was like, it's just like publishing. You got the people who do the stuff, and you put it together into package, and that's it.
Make it look pretty. There you go.
And we decided I think the name of the studio that in that building, they called their studio in that building that we ended up leaving, was Space Age Bachelor Pad Studios. So let's just call it Space Age Bachelor Pad Records.
Right, I remember that now, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we created Space Age Bachelor Pad Records almost exactly the same time, which is crazy, the timing of life, right? Mike Jones was starting Nail.
Oh, Nail Distribution.
Right.
Yeah.
And he had this idea to start Nail. Mike was a promoter in Salem, right?
Right. I forgot he came from Salem.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
And Mike knew the Daddies because he'd been promoting shows for them for years, knew they could sell a lot of albums, and they hadn't put an album out for 5 years. And Mike came to us and said, look, we'll make it a what do they call it, a P&D deal. For an extra $1, you don't even have to worry about producing them. I'll produce them. It was like whatever, $1 to produce a CD, another $1. And for us, it was like, whatever, you're going to take all the expenses, go for it, right?
Yep.
That we put out the record ourselves, and Mike distributed it, and we're like, we have distribution
so cool.
now. We had a conversation, and I was like, we didn't put it on paper at the time. That's another story entirely. We'll get to that probably, but we got to the point where Steve was like, well, why don't we just call you our manager? Because basically you're doing everything for us. And I was doing the merch, and I learned how to do the merch. I didn't know how to do the merch. That happened earlier, obviously, because we were on the road traveling.
Sure.
So I ended up doing all this stuff. And so I was the road manager, I was the manager, I was the business manager, I was the guy running the record label, and the merch person.
Quite a banshee, man.
Yes.
Quite a badass banshee.
And we put out Rapid City Muscle Car. We did a run of 2,500 and sold them.
Yeah.
and then, move forward. And then we did college radio for that record. We toured a lot, and that's when our touring really kicked in. We were doing in that 3-year period, we did 2 or 3 national tours a year. We were just touring our asses off.
Yeah. That's a lot of time on the road.
A lot of time on the road.
And did you go with everybody?
Oh, yeah. I was there.
Yeah, you were part of it, huh?
Oh, yeah. I was there. I was thinking about that the other day. Well, driving here, too, because, you have MapQuest and whatever. This is
yeah, sure.
We had, the Rand McNally. And, and we'd, call the venue and say, so how do we get to your club? And I'd write it on the back of my hand, and I'd call them, and I'd pay phone with my phone card. So, and it was
getting the books, and then you would go to the Quadrant. It was
exactly.
Probably the first time we played Utah was I didn't understand that was in the direction of the temple, right? So we're like, northwest what kind of a thing? We're just trying to get to Holy Cow, right? And
totally.
It's just it's just crazy. Yeah, different time.
Very different
Well,
time.
Speaking of a different time, I mean, the interesting thing about the Nail deal was that was probably a really, really good deal because back then stuff was so expensive to manufacture, and then you'd get it and they'd do 1,000 copies of your CD and there's 1 letter off or something. You're just like, dude, oh my goodness.
Exactly.
It's crazy.
Well, that's kind of my training as a writer/editor. It was I made sure that nothing like that.
Okay. So that's definitely have an advantage there for sure. But I would be curious to hear your thoughts at some point, what you think of kind of the industry now. I mean, distribution
we can get to that.
Isn't even a thing. I mean, it's just all digital.
Oh yeah. Well, we could go to that if you want.
Well, let's wrap up on the Daddies.
Okay, so then we did college radio. We're touring our butts off. And nothing was happening. Then we put out Kids on the Street. We had actually some weird people who were interested in that point. The guy who, we had some really funny people crossing our path. The guy who was the producer on Night of the Opera and all the Queen albums.
Oh, really?
Charles Thomas Baker. Baker was the last name or something like that. He came to us and wanted to produce our next album. He was totally into it. He wanted to create the big sound, and Steve didn't want to do it because he came to our shows in San Francisco. He was an interesting character. He had houses all over the world, like London, New York. We could do it wherever you want. I have studios in all my houses in London and New York and LA, and Steve didn't want to do it because the guy told him what he wanted to do, and he's like, I don't want him to have the control over the sound of the band. I don't like the direction he wants to go.
Sure, yeah.
And when Terry Ellis, who was Chrysalis Records, Jethro Tull and all that stuff, he wanted to put out a record on his label, his new label, and everyone told us, the deal was weird, so we just didn't do it. So we put on Kids on the Street, still nothing, touring our butts off. How many times can I say butts in this interview?
You can say butts as many times as you want. This is why I love podcasting. It's literally the last bastion of free speech ever.
And then it was getting frustrating, and we were getting to the point where we're like, what the hell? And the other thing was Steve didn't like to tour with ska bands because he didn't want to be pigeonholed. Right?
Fair enough. Mm-hmm.
Which, I understand that looking back on it completely. But then somehow finally we did a show with Let's Go Bowling, a couple of shows with Let's Go Bowling, and it was crazy. It was the biggest response we ever got from our new fans.
Nice.
It was holy, wait a minute, maybe we should be touring with ska bands, right? This is ridiculous because this is the amount of new fans we all of a sudden our album sales went up, our merch was flying out on shows. And
sure, and acquisition was so different back then because I remember we used to have, and this is a few years kind of after Kids on the Street probably, but we used to have
Kids on the Street was 95, I think, 94, 95.
Right, okay, so the first Henry's Child record that I didn't play on came out in 95. And we used to have these little, I just remember on the dot matrix printer, I'd print out lines, and I was just all here's your, leave your name and give me your address. And maybe if you have this thing called email, write that down too. I don't know if I'll ever use the email thing, but I'll definitely send it. And so we'd make these little sort of direct marketing flyers.
Oh yeah. John told the story really well. So whoever's listening here has to go back and listen to John's version of how this happened. But basically, John and I got together. We decided to do the co-op record label thing. which was an incredibly awesome thing for me because I was like I was basically doing business out of Steve's apartment, which was not only probably uncomfortable for him and intrusive. It was just for me. I was like, I had to go to his apartment to do work, and having that office was great. It was the greatest. Like I was telling you earlier, like all these people are still my friends and really close. I mean, it was a great work. It was the greatest working experience.
Let me tell you this. I can relate because to get first dibs at shows, I worked for Paula Vale at her house.
Ouch.
Now, we could trade stories about Steve's apartment.
Yeah.
But, Paula Vale's house.
Yeah, we're talking about another level.
Yes. It was fascinating.
But
so you get the gig, so you get the co-op with Elemental, and then you get your own office.
I was telling John, I can remember exactly. We were playing in this club. I can't remember the name of the club. That stuff's faded in my brain, but it was in New London, Connecticut, and it was 95, so I had my cell phone. Yeah. Cell phones now. And the cell phone rang, and it was John. And I was like, hey, John, what's up? And I remember I couldn't hear him because it was like sound check going on. And I walked into the bathroom in the place because, they sealed off the sound check. And John was like, hey, this is office opening up. Do you want it? It's like, well, I have to talk to Steve about it, but I'll say to you right now, I want it. And John's like, cool. All right. See you when you get back. And so when I got back, I moved into the office, and it was a great working relationship. I mean, eventually John became the production manager of everything, and so we didn't have to deal with Nail producing the albums anymore, and John found a cheaper way of doing it, and we kind of took control of that, and yeah, it was great. And, we had people actually calling record stores to sell, and which was a great thing. Well, it's what John was with having the office, what you're saying about mail. I had a mailing list for the band, and we would send out, when we played San Francisco, I was religious about it. I'd send out postcards with all of our dates in California and send them out to people on our mailing list.
Just what you did, yeah.
And we churned those. We had like people like Brenna, our intern.
I do remember Brenna. Yeah,
I'm still friends with Brenna. She lives in Portland now. She's a teacher.
Nice.
Brenna and all these people, they would do what they would do. And then we had the people.
She was a youngin' back in the day.
Yeah, she was like 15, 16 years old. Yeah. And then people like Scott and Woodward. Well, Woodward was kind of doing that. And Jenny O. What they'd do is they'd get on the phone and they'd call all the stores in the path of our touring. So they'd be like, the Daddies are coming to Riverside, California. You maybe want some records in your store. Well, I know you go through Nail, but you can buy directly from us too, or we can send you some POP and, blah, blah, blah. And so it was great. So then we started playing with ska bands, and all of a sudden things started like moving. Whoa, this is like moving ahead. This is interesting. So we did this tour in 96. We called it the Come Out Swingin' Tour. And we had done this gig in Philadelphia. It was just the Daddies and some other local ska bands from Philadelphia. I don't even know who they were at this point. I don't know if they exist anymore. But they are the most popular ska bands in Philadelphia. And we did Trocadero in Philly. It was this pretty big theater, and it was packed. And I remember looking down, packed with kids, and looking down, and the Daddies were playing, and they were trying to swing dance, and they were skanking to it, and they were just like totally into it. And we sold this ton of merch, and I said to Steve, we got to play with ska bands more. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We're not on the West Coast anymore. We're in Philadelphia, right? So then we did this tour in 96. It was the Come Out Swinging Tour. It was Let's Go Bowling. Real Big Fish had just put out their album. We sat in a hotel room in State College, Pennsylvania with them, all of us, these 24 people packed into one hotel room, and watched their video premiere on MTV.
Yeah. Yeah, video premieres. That was a big deal, man.
And they were on a record label called Mojo Records.
Yeah, I've heard of Mojo,
which was distributed by Universal.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. And Mojo doesn't exist anymore. They were bought by Zomba, I think. But I don't know if Zomba exists anymore. You know how that works. But anyway.
Yeah.
But acquisition. Anyway, and at this point, John was like looking for new distributors. We had Valley and Bayside, And then he was looking for other distributors, and Caroline was kind of interested, and that was a big deal. Caroline was a big distributor, and that Nail went through Caroline, but John had this idea, which didn't make Mike very happy, but we could do it cheaper by doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
So we did this tour. I remember we were in State College, Pennsylvania. We played this gig with Less Than Jake. So 3 ska bands and us.
Yep.
And we did this gig, and this kid came up to me and said, and these kids kept coming up to me, and this is the time when this thing went off in my head. They said to me, "Well, what album has all the ska on it?" And I said, "You mean all the horn music?" He's like, all the stuff with the horns. I was like, "Well, it's kind of distributed among the 3. This one's a little more funk, but if you like ska, Kids on the Street," because we just put out Kids on the Street. I was like, Kids on the Street.
Always push the latest record.
Sure. And I would do I tried to do 3 for instead of 3 for 30, 3 for 25 or whatever. And this thing went off in my head was like, what would happen if we just put all the stuff on one record? Because they would buy it. And I wonder if that would help, because every record label, whenever I would try and shop the band, like when we put out Kids on the Street, I tried to shop the band to record labels because I was trying. I'd never done that before, and they'd say to me, "Well, it's so all over the place. We can't really sell this." And still, record labels are still like that. If you're all over the place, they don't like it.
Yeah.
Because they can't.
Too diverse or something?
They can't market it.
So when you sell to a record label, what do you actually do? Do you get on the phone and give them a presentation, or
well,
you fly
at the time, this is before CDs. Remember, John was saying in the last interview about how expensive it was to make a CD. I would literally make cassette tapes.
Wow.
And send them out with labels. I'd make a label and I'd send it out. So I had this idea, and a really good friend of mine, John Mann, he was a guy who lived in Eugene. Remember Marigold?
Oh, yeah.
He managed Marigold. And he was a really good friend of mine. He taught me a ton about the music business that I had no idea about. I learned about radio. I learned a lot of stuff from him. He was a New York guy who had moved to Eugene because he figured it was a better place to raise his kids, and it was cheaper, and he had all his business ideas. He's a businessman, and he kind of liked to keep his finger in the music business. So he'd manage Marigold and played in a couple bands. He was a musician, old school musician from New York, played in James Taylor's band back in the day as a bass player. His other thing was he was asked by Liberty DeVito to join Billy Joel just before The Stranger was recorded, and he was like, "Nah, I don't think so."
Oh my God!
that was his that moment where
kids, that's life choices right there. Choose your own adventure. Turn to page 87.
So anyway, I told him about my idea to put everything, all the swing stuff on one record, and we can call it the Swing and Hits of the Cherry Poppin Daddies. And he was like, "Howard, that's an awesome idea. Let's get together and put together a thing with all the songs on them, and we can the best order, and we'll figure." And he had a burner in his house at this point.
Those were a big deal.
Yeah, and he had money, so he had a burner in his house, and so he made these CDs. One day, remember L&L Market in Eugene?
Oh yeah, I know where that is.
I sat down with Steve and I said, "Look," and basically we had talked about, there's this discussion in the band. It's like, if things don't happen here, they've been doing it, this is 96, 97. It's like they've been at it for 9 years. They're or 8 years. They're like, if things don't happen here, we're working our butt off, and
we're tired.
We're tired.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I think this. So I said to him, "Look, 2 things will happen. We'll either sell a ton of these, or we'll get signed. Let's try and do this." And Steve went, "Okay, well, let's do that, and we'll record 2 or 3 extra songs that we have, new songs for the people who have the other albums." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." And I sent out CDs at this point to record labels all over the place. And I had a lot of conversations with major, what was his name? He was the head of Columbia Records, John Brenner. He was head of Columbia Records, and he called me. And he said, "This is Howard." He said, he called me, or I left a voice message, and I called him back. And he said to me, "Howard, this is a great idea. It's I don't know if I can get my guys to bite on this, but keep pushing this, because you're on the right track here."
Oh, that's validation, man.
Yeah.
That's great.
And so then what happened was, we're about to put the record out, and we made like 5,000 copies.
Of Zoot Suit Riot?
Of Zoot Suit Riot. And we put it out, we're going to put it on Space Age Bachelor Pad. And I'm still shopping it. We're just like, screw it, we're going to just put it out. So we put it out, and Mojo Records, Real Big Fish they're like 19, 20 years old. They're like pretty young. And
we were like, that young back then?
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And a lot of them, a couple of them were 21. But a lot of them were like...
There's only 5 people in my band, so I'm not used to the Brady Bunch like moving around.
Yeah. And so we ended up... so they talked us up. They're like, we were on tour with these guys. They're the most amazing band. You know, you guys... They looked up to the band.
Yeah.
I remember we were playing in Vermont, and I walked upstairs, and I've heard someone practicing the trumpet. I was looking for Dana, the trumpet player for the Daddies.
Yeah, Dana.
I was looking for Dana Heitman, and I walked upstairs, and I knocked on the door, the green room, and I said, Dana. And the guy, and the trumpet player for the Real Big Fish opened the door. I was like, oh my God, you thought that was Dana playing? I'm blown. Oh my God. And I was like, no, yeah, man.
Where's the bathroom? I'm just looking for the bathroom.
Exactly.
Well, you know, it's funny, real quick. So back to the Zoot Suit Riot sessions that were done. They were done with Bill Barnett, because that was one of the very first, fresh out of high school. Jarrett Hawley, who's producing our new record, he actually sat in with Bill on there, and he would like just go get drumsticks, and he would kind of like arrange mics and stuff like that. And he was like, he probably was like 17 or 18 at the time. You know,
yeah,
so
he had a bunch of younger interns.
Like,
I bet if I met him, But yeah, I mean, Bill did all the Daddies albums. He and Steve, and he still does. He and Steve have a great rapport.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, just jumping ahead a little bit. I mean, I went on All Music, and I noticed, man, they're still putting out records. They had a record from 2000, 2008, 2013, and then 2016, and then 2017 is the 20-year of what we're talking about, the 20-year anniversary of Zoot Suit Riot.
Right. 20 years.
Because Clearly Confused for us, which was our first Elemental record, which was our second album.
That was 90.
Came out in 97 as well.
Right.
In April of 97.
So yeah, we put this out and we just blew through them. And John couldn't like keep up the orders and...
High quality problem, right?
Yeah, high quality problem.
Hey guys, Tom here. Listen, thanks for tuning in to my conversation with Howard. I mean, it was really fun to reconnect and really get on a level that only wisdom, true wisdom can bring, how much of a positive and fun influence that Howard was in my life. You know, and John Bolt too, he sort of comes from the same time, around the time that Henry's Child got signed, and it was exciting. It was exciting all around. And I learned quite a few things from both of those guys that have carried forward in not only my life, but my business and kind of what I do for a living, and it's just been really great. So to have this opportunity, I am truly grateful. And now that you've heard it directly from the mouth of the masters, you can tell that these guys are self-made creators, for sure. So next week, we're going to have the second part of Howard's interview where we get into the Daddies getting signed and we talk about Howard's new book, When All Else Fails. I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that we're playing tomorrow in the afternoon. That would be Saturday, July 28th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the Guitars Under the Stars Festival in Lebanon. It's a 45-minute set. And it's our first time playing for Guitars Under the Stars. So we are very excited and super stoked to be there. So I hope that you can make it out there at 2 o'clock to the Guitars Under the Stars Festival. Now, if you liked what you heard, please do us a favor and give us a 5-star rating and subscribe to this podcast. If you really liked what you heard, please leave a positive review. That really helps the search algorithm be able to find us and sort of move us up in the charts of available podcasts. So we would deeply, deeply appreciate that. So tune in next week for part 2 of my conversation with Howard. And we'll see you tomorrow at the Guitars Under the Stars Festival in Lebanon. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.